Hello there, and welcome back to the Disconnected. I'm here with Alexandra Heller-Nicholas, who is a director, writer, editor, producer, everything extraordinaire. Alexandra, thank you for doing this again.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I have wanted to have you on here for ages because genuinely, and I truly do not say this to everybody, but you are one of two or maybe three people that if the name Alexandra Heller-Nicholas is on the back of a physical media release, I have to have it. It goes on the wish list immediately because it is always fascinating.
That's really nice to hear because it's such, I'm sure so many of your guests have said the same thing. It's quite insular work. You sort of sit
Yeah.
in your little bubble, quite literally when you're recording, you're in like a little bubble. So it's really nice to know that there's a sort of, at least one grateful recipient on the, on the end of it.
Now that I've started doing some of this, yeah, there's some of it where you get lost and not really understanding if people are ever even going to care. So I get it,
Right.
and I'm glad that you're out there still working because man,
Oh, good.
it is overwhelming the number of titles that you've been on, the number of books that you've written, and I'm just happy to be able to know that you're out there doing the work.
It's a joy being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, one of the reasons, it just all the work over the last year. I feel like we've gotten so many announcements from you, and I'm going to highlight the I think is the most recent one at the moment. You're going to be on Kindergarten Cop 4K from Kino Lorber. What the heck?
Really excited about that one. That is with my friend and a very long-term colleague of mine, a guy called Josh Nelson.
Yeah.
Josh and I used to do a radio show together in Australia on a very kind of well-known community radio station here in Melbourne called Triple R. And Josh moved to the United States around 2016, I think. And I just missed him. I just missed talking to him about film. Sort of, we would catch up once a week and do our radio show together, and doing commentaries together has kind of filled that gap.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Kindergarten Cop was the last one that we recorded together. And I just, I love the film, and it's always a challenge, I think, because it's quite outside the sort of normal stuff that I do, but it's such a comfort film for me. And it's always a bit of a challenge, I think, to kind of try to bring a critical approach to a film that you love on that kind of passed out on the couch with a hangover kind of level. And Josh always just raises the bar for me. Like
Right.
He's really I have a lot of really wonderful colleagues, but without fail, Josh is always the one that really kind of demands that I lift my own game. So it was a delight just doing it with Josh. And yeah, it was a challenge. It was a real challenge because, as I said, it's so, I do mostly kind of horror or exploitation films,
Right.
and so that one is very much out of my my typical area. But no, we're both really happy, I think, with the final product on that one.
Well, your typical arena, I mean, you mentioned horror, but it is so much more than that. I mean, there are books focused on female horror filmmakers. One of the biggest ones, of course, is the Rape Revenge Films book. You've written on Suspiria specifically. You've written on found footage films. Is the Rape Revenge film book the one that you still get the most like overall feedback on and people reading and reaching out about?
It's a really good question. Interestingly enough, I think probably the most successful book that I've had in terms of sales and widespread kind of coverage and response was my 2020 book, which is called 1000 Women in Horror. And that's the closest that I've come to really doing like a coffee table book. Like I really wanted to sort of step away from, I wanted to do something fun. I really wanted to step away from doing the kind of more kind of academic survey style kind of in-depth stuff. I wanted to do something that I found fun and that would reach a different audience. So that book certainly, that's the kind of book that people would give each other for Christmas. Whereas stuff on Rape Revenge, you're probably not going to give somebody, unless you know them pretty well, you're probably not going to, it's not really a stocking filler. Doesn't make Amazon's stocking filler list, that book. But that being said, I mean, it really raises an interesting question about how you, as an author, how you view the idea of reception. Because without fail, my work on Rape Revenge, so there's the original book that came out in 2011, and then I wrote a quite heavily revised second edition, which came out for the 10-year anniversary in 2021. which has like a whole new chapter, and it's quite a different book in many ways. But I also wrote a book on Abel Ferrara's Miss 45. So I've written a couple of books on rape revenge, and without fail, when I go to film festivals or when I do public speaking, that's the book that people want to talk to me about, without fail. And it's never, I mean, I guess it doesn't surprise me now, but when I first started talking about it, the thing that I wasn't expecting was men. A lot of men want to talk about that book,
Yeah.
and in really interesting ways. In that, a lot of men who are survivors themselves come to rape revenge films. Certainly not all survivors, but come to rape revenge films, which are predominantly about male perpetrators and women survivors. And it's sort of a cathartic process for male survivors just as much as women survivors.
Right.
These films sort of really help some people. For some people, they're obviously very traumatic and horrible, and I certainly don't expect everybody to have the same reaction to these quite challenging films. But I
Right.
think that was the thing that I wasn't prepared for, was how many men who are survivors who might not have the same kind of social or cultural framework to talk about their experiences as some women might. These men really want to talk to me about their books, and a lot of them it's almost asking for permission. Like, is it, and it's always hypothetical, but it's like, if a man was if there's a man who's a survivor and he finds these films helpful, does that mean that he's a bad guy? Like, really, those kind of that conversations of that kind of level, and it's heartbreaking, it's devastating. And of course, it doesn't make you a bad person. These films can be hugely cathartic. And I'm not the only person that sort of has written about that and talked about that.
Yeah, I put out a video early this year about how some of these traumatic films people go to for a sense of catharsis, not just about assault or sexual assault, but I mean even religious trauma, or
Yep,
I mean some of these even like loneliness. People just find solace in feeling
absolutely.
accepted in some of these. And specifically with rape revenge, it's obviously a bit of an awkward topic because who's going to come out and say this is my favorite genre? That's the first thing. But there are some people that they can be somewhere that you turn to often and really get, not enjoyment's not even the right word, but it's more of feeling seen. And it's so important to have people like you speaking about it out there.
I think these films, whether we're talking about something kind of extreme like rape revenge, or even like you said, like, during lockdown, I think that a lot of horror, things like, pandemic films, things like zombie films or kind of other
Yeah.
viral, they kind of give us a language. They give us a kind of reference point. Like, how do we talk about these things? How do we
Yep.
feel about these things? How do we kind of frame these things in our brain? When September 11 happened, there was like there's been really amazing writing about it, in that so many people who were there in New York described it as like it's just like a movie, because there's no other real point of reference. So
Yep.
movies, I think, when it comes to trauma or experience in general, screen culture, I think, can give us a kind of toolkit, a kind of discursive toolkit, um, that kind of provide, often in a very kind of loose way, a kind of way to kind of conceive of stuff, even if it's not to talk about it, just to kind of get our
Right.
own heads around stuff, which is, for me, gives it enormous value.
There are so many different nuanced ways to speak on stuff like this, and there's so many people that probably would speak on it if they felt free to. But the way that you approach some of these topics, one thing that I'm a huge fan of, I've listened to multiple times, so I'm going to throw it out there for everybody to try to seek out. You did an episode of a podcast called Somebody's Watching with Eleanor, and it's all about male nudity, and it's so enlightening to really just think back on how, if somebody's not here pointing this out, I'm not ever going to think that there's something odd about this. But the way that you and the other expert on there and Eleanor just dove into everything, it felt so important and needed.
Eleanor's a really profound person. She's
Yes.
a really brave. There's something about her, like she's so brave and so thoughtful, yet nothing about her comes across as pretentious or like she's kind of performative. She's just
Yeah.
so kind of, in her persona, she's very sort of gentle and very kind of matter of fact. So to tackle that, and I've gone blank. You'll have to forgive me. Was it Professor Lehman? I think he
I
was
think that's the name. Let me
yeah,
verify.
who whose work on masculinity is something that I've admired, for years,
Yes.
and I actually cite him in my Rape Revenge book, and just this extraordinary thinker. Yeah, no, that was one of the most exciting conversations I'd have, because even for me, sort of certainly compared to Professor Lehman, I'd not really kind of dived in depth into the concept of especially male full frontal nudity. It wasn't something that
Right.
I'd really sat down. Like, I'd never written about that specifically. But again, so much of my work had sort of pivoted around that, the idea of that. So that was such a rewarding experience, and provided me with a really interesting way to kind of rethink my own work. The yeah, that I agree with you. Like, just to hear Professor Lehman, really the master, really like the kind of expert on male
Yeah.
full frontal nudity, if you will, and he would embrace that label, I think. So I don't say that in a sort of cutting way. I say that as a
Right.
kind of compliment. Remarkable man, remarkable thinker, very generous with his ideas. A lot of academics get a very kind of uppity, and nothing about that with him at all. Like, he's such a generous communicator, and he's so excited, and he wants people to kind of join into his sort of thought processes. Just lovely stuff.
Well, funny enough, that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring up some of your work, because so much of even just like the visual essays that are obviously about something that you're passionate about, but they're done in a way that are magnetic, I guess, in a way that not only am I, absorbing just simply the words that you're saying, but I feel drawn into wanting to research the topic more. And that is the sort of thing that I'm striving to do in everything I'm editing for some of these discs. And it's just amazing to hear some of the topics that you've broached on. And one of the things that's been a big part of it, obviously, is gender. And I would love to hear from someone like yourself. Just explain, just as curt or as obvious as you want to, why it's important for us to highlight gender still in 2023.
Yeah, it's a really good question. My wonderful colleague Lee Gambin, who I believe you
Yeah.
have crossed paths with, the excellent Lee Gambin, he was telling me recently that there are these forums. I don't go to these forums, but he said there's one in particular where it's a lot of sort of older gentlemen,
Yeah.
and they like, there's kind of like a running gag apparently that, like, oh god, it's Alex talking about feminism again, and they get all kind of gruff and cranky about it. So, oh,
Yeah.
can't she talk about it? And it's such a classic, but it's like, not everything's about gender. And it's like, well, when you live in a gendered body, when you live in a racialized body, when you live in a body that is othered, in whatever way that is, it could be in terms of ability, gender, sexuality, whatever. If you live in a body that is broadly culturally othered, everything kind of is about that,
Yep.
like, and to me, that's the power of horror, is that horror's always been about gender. And I'm quite conscious, for me, like, I'm certainly, like, I identify as a feminist. That word can mean very different things to very different people, and I feel that it's commonly weaponized,
Oh yeah.
in ways that people do, I think, in quite a deceptive, unwholesome manner, in that they kind of work from an assumption of what feminism is without defining their terms.
Yep.
And that's why we have people that are transphobic who call themselves feminists, so, and then you have people that have the exact opposite ideology who also call themselves feminists. So it can get very deceptive. So I'm very conscious of how people weaponize the word feminism for unwholesome reasons, to kind of, they come in with a bias on what that
Yep.
word means. So I'm very conscious of, like, of course I'm a feminist, but you also have to add to that, well, I'm not a TERF. Like, I embrace my transgender sisters and
Right.
brothers and non-binary folk, because I'm not an asshole. That's what it comes
It's
to
just
me.
that easy.
Right. To me, that's what feminism is. Just like, don't be an asshole.
Yep.
Like, it's like most, just don't be horrible, don't be hateful, don't be shit. So that's what feminism is to me. But even sadly in 2023, you kind of need to actually spell that out. So I tend to use the phrase gender politics in that I talk about gender politics. And what I
Yep.
find that for me that enables is that it also, and this comes back to what we were just talking about, that also gives me space to talk about masculinity, because I'm not just talking about women. I'm not just talking about half of the picture. Like, to me, it's about gender politics. It's about much broader things, about how gender
Right.
is defined and utilized, and how gender works as a kind of sort of governing concept, or point of difference culturally and socially. And it's in film from the very start of film history. Like, you go back to something, I'm fascinated. I think it's an 1898 film, the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. It could be 1895. I'm going from memory here. But it's like, it goes for like 10 seconds, if that. And it's literally just Mary going up to the chopping block and having her head chopped off. So it's a really important film, because it's really the first special effect, horror special effect that we have in cinema. But of course, the woman who plays Mary Queen of Scots was not a woman. I think it was an accountant for the film company called Robert Thomas or Robert Tomei. And that character is credited as Mrs. Robert Tomei or Mrs. Robert Thomas. But it's him. It's a man in a dress. So, like, the queer history of horror is the history of horror from the get-go, from the start. So gender politics gives me a much bigger space to talk about these things than the word feminism, because I don't have to kind of go through this sort of rigmarole of kind of trying to defuse people's biases when they come to that term. And that doesn't mean that I'm anti-feminist or anything like that at all. Like, I very confidently define myself, very comfortably define myself as a feminist. But yeah, especially when I'm dealing with people that I don't know, which is what when you're doing a video essay, when you're doing a commentary, you're talking to people that you don't know. And yeah, I just don't want to spend half an hour of every commentary defusing the history of what the word feminism means, to end up with that statement, like, just don't be an asshole. Like,
The funny thing is that ideology, I swear it can apply to half the incendiary terms that people are just lit by nowadays. I mean, one of the biggest ones in the US over the last few years has been woke, and half the people, when they hear that word, they don't even know what the hell it means. They can't define it. They just know it's their boogeyman.
I would think about, even 10, 20 years ago, it used to be the big kind of cliche. Like, woke to me feels like the kind of contemporary manifestation of this earlier phrase, which is political correctness gone mad. And it's like, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that actually mean? Again, it just comes down to, don't be a dick. Like, don't be a dick. Don't be an asshole. And suddenly woke, like, it's this slippery, amorphous, hugely weaponized concept that it's like, it's an onion. You peel it, and then the onion's gone. There's nothing inside. It's just ridiculous. This sort of rhetorical, what's the phrase that I'm after? It's deceptive. It kind of takes us away from, like, the word. I have a bugbear with the word problematic too, in that people use the word woke and they use the word problematic to shut down conversation. It's like, oh, this is problematic, full stop, end of story. And it's like, no, that should be the start of the conversation.
Right.
And woke should be the start of a conversation, and it never is. It's like, go woke, go broke, like a kind of final line. And it's like, it just means nothing. It's this hollow kind of catch, this hollow kind of thing. And it's political correctness gone mad. It's, that's where we start to have really interesting conversations. And the tragedy of the time that we live in is that it's used to the opposite effect. It's used to shut down conversation. And some things you shouldn't have conversations about, right? Like, it's not that everything is open for debate, because we come back to, just don't be an asshole.
Right. And with that surrounding gender, I think that's where we find a lot of the problems of why it still needs to be discussed, because I'm always fascinated just how ignorant I am when certain facts come out and you find out this is the first female winning Oscar, first female director that won an Oscar or something, and it's way later than you'd ever imagine, or this was only the seventh film directed by a female that we know of, and it's like the 50s, and you're like, wait, hold on, what now? Let's discuss this, because that's crazy to me. So yeah, the books that you've written and the way that you're out there spreading this, it's not even just about separating fields in any way. It's understanding where we are so that we can start to bring those fields closer together.
It's interesting. I've just submitted the manuscript for my next book. The title is still in being debated with my wonderful publisher. God bless them; they're very patient with me. But it's on women-directed films about witches and witchcraft. That's
Ooh,
the topic. And when I say that to people, they're like, "So that maybe that's like 5, 10 films." It's like I've got like 60 or 70, and it
wow.
goes right back to the silent era. You know, things like Lenny. Oh, I've gone blank
Riefenstahl?
on her name. Not Riefenstahl, sorry, not Lenny.
Oh,
The Prince Ahmed. I've gone completely blank on her name. Please forgive me. I'm terrible. I'm going to look this up.
you're fine.
It's like it's literally the first full feature length. Lottie Renninger. I always forget her name for some reason.
Lottie.
1926, 1927. It's the first feature length animated film ever made.
Wow.
Was by this amazing German animator, and you would know her style if you saw it. She did this sort of beautiful sort of shadow puppetry style animation, kind of silhouette, just absolutely gorgeous. And the figure of the witch in that film is incredible. So we have Maya Deren, of course, the incredible American experimental filmmaker. Like history is full of women who have made films about witches and witchcraft,
Yeah,
which to me is really interesting because witchcraft and the kind of historical idea of witches as a kind of broader kind of concept, there's a really interesting parallel with women's filmmaking. The idea that filmmaking is a kind of male domain, and that women who dabble in this are sort of messing with like male knowledge. The sort of the kind of male science is sort of in opposition to the idea of the kind um, of kind of feminine knowledge that is sort of embodied in the figure of the witch. But it's not just horror. So it's obviously things like Annabilla's The Love Witch and I am not a witch, the amazing film by I think she's a Welsh Zimbabwean filmmaker. It came out a couple of years ago, which is incredible. But the second Hocus Pocus film was directed by a woman. The second Nanny McPhee film was directed by a woman. The Bewitched film with Nicole Kidman was directed by a woman. So it's really interesting. It's a really interesting when you start sort of thinking about women's filmmaking outside of that kind of top 10 listicle, hey, can you believe women make films? Which I think that we're still at a little bit. I'd like to think that we're slowly moving past the listicle way of thinking about women's filmmaking. Because when we kind of step beyond that, we start to get some really interesting kind of histories come out of it. And for me, that was one of them, was just how many women had made films about witches and witchcraft.
yeah, and that's what it always comes back to me, because you hear some of these facts and you're like, well, hold on, because we're just not discussing a lot of these that actually exist. So let's just educate on that rather than, in a sense, like almost hiding the history, or in all reality, it's belittling the achievements of other people and raising up others.
Absolutely. And a lot of it comes down to really practical things. And this takes us back to physical media and home entertainment in certainly with women's, and I'm not just talking about horror or exploitation film, but women's filmmaking in general. The issue has been as much about distribution and archiving as much as it's been about women getting money to make films in the first place.
Yep.
And the same thing applies to to queer filmmakers, to filmmakers of color, to black filmmakers. So it's not just women. I think that that's a kind of useful example of these kind of othered filmmaking practices. But I'm always really excited by the concrete role that home media has to play in both archiving and distributing these films and finding these films in the first place. And it's not just Criterion, it's not just these wonderful highbrow
Yep.
kind of companies. It's people like TerraVision. It's people like Vinegar Syndrome. It's people like Arrow that are really in the guts of the archive, finding these women-directed treasures and really doing the hard yards on restoring them, on distributing them, on getting them to people that will value them and will appreciate them. So I genuinely, certainly for horror and exploitation, I actually think we're living at a really exciting time for women's filmmaking history, in that these films are really coming out from places that you would not necessarily expect. TerraVision in particular and Brad Henderson, I think, need particular acknowledgement, and Vinegar Syndrome as well. The stuff that they're digging up is just jaw-dropping to me. Like, really exciting stuff is coming out from these people in terms of women's filmmaking history.
I fully agree. Yeah, having worked behind the scenes with Brad on some of the releases already, it is always enlightening to hear how much he respects the filmmakers and how much he desires diversity through everything that he's doing. I have immense respect for Brad and what he's hit there.
He's the king, and it's why I can't come at this kind of question of women's filmmaking and gender politics and genre. I just can't come at it as a girls versus boys
Right.
thing, because there are so many proper allies. The American genre film people are doing
They're
incredible
amazing.
work. I can't list everybody who's doing this amazing work.
Right.
Saturn's Core, these amazing people are really doing incredible work, and they're not, I mean, Brad's a really great example. I hate to sort of narrow down on him personally, but he's not the kind of person that'd be like, oh, I'm here saving women's filmmaking. He's
Right.
not that. He's too busy working to kind of ask for credit for that kind of stuff. He's too busy
Yeah.
doing the grunt work, like the really hard work of finding this stuff. And yeah, to me, like he's a proper ally, and I don't know how he would feel about me saying that, so I'm sorry if that makes him
I'll make sure
uncomfortable.
to link him to this part
um,
specifically.
right, so everybody should be buying TerraVision. Everybody should be buying Vinegar Syndrome, AGFA, all of these great, a lot of the partner labels from Vinegar Syndrome. It's really exciting stuff. I'm constantly surprised with the stuff that I see being put out. It's like I never thought, I mean, there's stuff that like that I got off like Cinemageddon like 15-20 years ago, and it's like getting like a Blu-ray release. It's like, are you kidding me? Like it's so exciting. I don't know if I can mention Cinemageddon. Can I do that?
Of course, yeah. No,
Right.
we're not canceled yet. There's another inflammatory word.
Right.
You bring up a great point, and I really want to highlight something. Especially, we had a discussion about this today in my Discord. Actually, is a lot of people are looking at the idea of film archival somehow as pretentious, which is hilarious to me. But beyond that, one part that is really associated with that is not just the archiving aspect of the physical film, but accessibility. Because archiving film, if it's locked in a vault somewhere, it's safe, but that does nothing for me and the education of all of us. We need to be able to see this film, consume the art, pass it around, learn from it, and not only that, embrace those filmmakers and see what else that they've had on the impact of film. So all of these home video companies, it is so important that they're out there and available. So completely agree.
Absolutely. I mean, and the thing that I love about these labels that I've mentioned is that, there's an audience that will buy anything that TerraVision put out just by virtue of the quality of their work. And there's a trust. There's like a consumer trust that companies like TerraVision and Vinegar Syndrome, the partner labels, Arrow, so many of these companies, even Kino Lorber, there's a trust that some, what these companies put their energies into bringing us is worthy of our attention. And there's a kind of consumer goodwill there that cannot be faked. Like, you can't buy that. And it's extraordinary because it puts these films into the hands of people who might not normally watch or consciously go out of their way to watch films directed by women filmmakers.
Right.
And I think that's really part of the excitement and the preciousness of what we find happening in physical media at the moment, especially in the films of, not just horror and exploitation film, but, pornography and these areas that are, I don't mean to diss Criterion, because Criterion's incredible, but, there's these BFI Criterion sort of highbrow, and these companies that I'm talking about are dealing with very different kinds of film, but putting the same kind of, giving these releases the same kind of attention and care.
Right.
That to me, it's just indefinable how important this work is, because this is the work that people like, where I am in Australia, the National Film and Sound Archive here would never put the attention into some of the Australian films that I've seen Umbrella really focus on, and they've kind of had to do it on their own to really bring these releases to light and to help them find their audience, because these sort of more formal film bodies, I think, still have this kind of, highbrow, lowbrow
Definitely.
thing. And, sometimes some films might break through that, things like Suspiria but it's very rare. It's very, very rare.
Funny enough, the highbrow lowbrow thing really brings to light something else that you did earlier this year, which is you were invited to Spain to be a part of a film festival, and film festivals are such an interesting topic of conversation because it's great that film is getting out there, and then we're just not seeing a lot of those films ever again. So I mean, the first thing. How did that feel? How did that feel going all the way across the world to be judging this massive film festival?
It was huge, both personally and professionally for me. Like, I hadn't traveled since lockdown. So where I am in Melbourne,
Oh,
in Australia,
wow.
I think we had the second longest lockdown in the
Yep.
world, next to a city somewhere in Argentina, I believe. So we really didn't come out of lockdown until late 2022. No,
Wow.
sorry, 21. So 2021. Let me get the date right there. Um, and it was very difficult. It was very, very difficult. Australia had lockdowns, but Melbourne had very long lockdowns.
Right.
That was the first time that I traveled
Wow.
overseas. So, and Australia, I was sort of saying to you before we started recording, like, Melbourne has quite a decent population, but there's not really the kind of horror community or kind of cult film community that you get even in cities that are much smaller in the United States. It's a very small community. So my people mostly, almost completely, are in the Northern Hemisphere. So it was really nice just to go back and find my people again. People that I'd known online for a long time, like Alex West from Toronto, who's wonderful. Kim Newman in the UK. Everybody's God, just the most beautiful human being I think I've ever met in my life. And just being around my people. So if anything, Sitges just felt like school camp. It was like a sort of horror or cult film nerd boot camp. Like, it was incredible. But I do find film festivals really exciting. I just as a kind of broader concept, and Sitges, I have to say, Monica and Angel, they treated us like royalty. And if you ever want to go to an international film festival, a genre film festival, put Sitges at the top of your list. It's magic. It's just an
Wow.
incredible experience, and I can't rave about it enough. But yeah, film festivals. So I used to do, for years, I did sort of what I now call like the meat grinder of new releases. Like, I would sort of like, there's a new film coming out and I have to review it, and I don't do that anymore. I feel like I did my time with the grinder of new releases. And there's value to that and there's virtue to that, but to me it kind of had a shelf life. So my new release film criticism tends to focus now on film festivals.
Right.
Where I kind of, I will go to a film festival and I will spend 2 weeks, watch 5 films a day and just like, do 400-500 word reviews of every single film that I see. And it's like going to the gym. Like, it's like boot camp, like sort of exercise the muscles. And I love it. But you're right. Like, I so many films fall through the cracks. And it's, again, it's interesting because it's places like, I was speaking to a colleague at Arrow today, and they're I'm not going to say what title it is, but they've picked up a film that played quite well on the film festival circuit last year, but effectively vanished after that.
Yep.
And it was like, this was a great film and nobody talks about it anymore, and it's sort of been forgotten. So it's really lovely that these films are sort of given this sort of second life, if you will. These are films that are never going to make the multiplex circuit. They're not going to play... they're probably not going to be picked up by Netflix.
Right.
They're just going to fall outside. So what happens to them after that? They might go really well on the festival circuit, but what happens to them after that? And yeah, home entertainment unfortunately can't pick up all of them, but I think does do incredible work in picking up the slack for at least catching some of these films before they're sort of lost completely. And it's heartbreaking when films, really good films, do vanish.
Right. Yeah, and with film festivals, not only, is it something that if they're going to one of these places, they're hoping for distribution, but if you don't get that, what is the next rung of the ladder down? Like, if you have a bit of a disappointing play, what is the next step other than languishing and literally being a lost film. You are stuck in an area where people can't see it. They don't know anything about it, so they don't think they're missing anything. And for some reason, people think that if it's not Top Gun 2 or something, it doesn't exist. It's not a film to them. They don't even know that it's art that's out there.
Yeah. I think we're lucky in horror in particular in that we have Shudder. Shudder does a huge amount of work in picking up these films that really would just not find a home elsewhere.
I agree.
And it's not necessarily what I like about the curation, is that it's not necessarily films that have been like a quote unquote hit on the festival circuit. I think there's something very intuitive. Sam Zimmerman needs particular referencing here. I think he's a very intuitive programmer and curator for Shudder, amongst all the many other things that he does, in that he just has a gut feeling for what will work. And he really believes in the films that Shudder picks up. And all the people at Shudder are great, but Sam in particular, I think, has a real intuitive, kind of a real instinct for what needs to be sort of salvaged from this sort of festival circuit.
Film festivals. One of the things that is attached to this that I'd really love to hear about is you judging it and considering by the photos and living vicariously through your travels. It seemed that you had a wonderful time. So just the work that goes into that. Did you feel this immense pressure? How did you feel stepping into those days where you're giving scores to things and talking with your peers and making the best of it?
One of the best things that ever happened to me as a film critic was working as a film festival programmer, very briefly, but I was gifted with the experience of seeing people like James Shapiro, Luke Mullen, Evram Ersoy, these great film people, just seeing how they worked close up was such a gift to me. And James in particular, and all of them, that film programmers in general, I think, are a lot kinder to film than film critics are. And James, James's kind of drumbeat was always, it's really hard to make a film. And that was a gift to me. And it completely changed the way that I worked as a film critic, because it's like, it's actually really hard to make a film. And most film critics don't think like that. There's this sort of Rottweiler, like attack. And it's like, it's really expensive and it's really hard to make a film, and that any film gets finished to completion, whether you like it or not, is almost neither here nor there, because it's so hard to make a film. And coming to judging for film festivals with that fundamental belief actually makes it, especially with peers that I was gifted, just the most incredible for Sitges, Ana Torrent, the great Spanish actress, was on our jury. Kim Newman, my king, who I've already mentioned, David Fine, an American god that I adore, and Jerome Paillard, who was the guy that really started and ran the Cannes Film Festival market for decades. So these people who were really sort of very much at the top of their game. So seeing how they kind of approached film and how they worked, it was a very generous experience, I have to say, very positive, not really bad vibes. Like there wasn't like, it would be a very different experience, I think, talking with film critics purely about it, than it was with these sort of industry peers. It was a really exciting thing, and I find that it was very rewarding and very intuitive. I have to say that there wasn't a lot of deliberations. We had a lot of prizes to give, so there was like which film gets which award, but we were all sort of very much on the same page of what films were really, the cream floats to the top. So it was such a positive experience, and there was real respect for the craft of filmmaking. So even films that were in competition that didn't get an award, there was nothing petty or bitchy. It was always like,
good.
I can't believe these people made a film. Like they finished a film, and whether it works for me or not is, as I said, it's almost beside the point, because it's so fucking hard to make a film.
One thing that people never point out about some of these, not only is it difficult to make a film, but somebody that has no income coming from this the first time they're doing it, and they're doing it with no studio backing or anything like that, when they make a movie, they're basically signing up to work on this thing for months to get it out. And it's not It's not the asylum. It's not where they're put into a machine that has support and they're putting something out in 9 days. This is their life for months and months and months.
If
It's a
you're
lot of
lucky,
respect.
months and months. Like if
Yeah.
you're lucky, because often if you're, I mean, I know, and it's not rare, but I know people that have made movies on their credit card. And you go in and you don't know if you're going to finish it. And you kind of have to wait for, if you're doing other work, you're waiting for money to come in so you can pay people. Or if you're working on a budget down from that, you're not even paying people. It's, you've got favors coming in. There's a whole kind of complex balancing act, and you
Yeah.
don't know what's, we even know from like big budget productions, not every film that goes into production will finish. Not every film that goes into production, even if it is finished, will get released. That's the kind of weird time that we're living in now.
Yep.
That they might get shelved for tax reasons or whatever. It's really hard to make a movie, and anybody who does it, whether I like your movie or not, they're like, wow, you made a movie. That's
Just bravo.
amazing. That's incredible to me. It's incredible to me that anything gets finished ever. Like,
Yeah, I agree. Funny enough, behind the scenes, some of these, I'm just looking around at the massive piles of discs I have around me. Some of these, I feel the same way about some of these releases. They find film reels in some coffee shop in South America, and they find the director alive in the hills of Switzerland, and they get all these things together on some of these, and you bring just this amazing context to so many of these releases. And this year alone, the number of releases that have come out, I would love to hear just how you feel about the industry as a whole, because I mean, you've been on the Psycho collection this year, Kids from Umbrella, you're on Kindergarten Cop. Like, I would not have guessed that 6 months ago. There's so many the partner labels that you've done Gaspar Noé titles this year. It has been such a lovely time just to see what you bring to the table on some of these. So how does it feel overall as a whole? What's your temperature of the industry at the moment?
I'm really positive about it. For partially, for the reasons that I've already said, just in terms of like this kind of, in the trenches archival work.
Right.
That this, and it's so important. Like I can't emphasize that enough. But for me personally, in terms of the work that I'm getting, I'm very grateful to be getting it. And I certainly feel that there is a kind of renaissance of physical media, just in terms of the work that's coming to me.
Yeah.
I'm always sort of impressed by the breadth of the kind of work that is available. So as I said, it's not just sort of highbrow films. It's not, I've had the good fortune a couple of years ago. I worked on some Ingmar Bergman films for the BFI, which was a delight. But not everything has to be Ingmar Bergman. You can have Infernal Rapist,
Right.
and that's okay. And it's and I love that I'm at a point, and I don't mean to sound like cocky about it, but I feel like I've been doing this long enough that I feel like I've earned the right to be at the point where people will bring me The Virgin Spring by Ingmar Bergman and also bring me Infernal Rapist. Like I kind of, it's like, good. This is how things should be. It's like a universe in harmony. And, while I've sort of been, I guess, emphasizing this sort of more sort of low budget, sort of more sort of culturally denigrated material, kind of exploitation film, I do think it speaks to a very healthy kind of landscape or terrain for home entertainment in general, and that we are getting a real diversity of stuff coming out. It's not just sort of highbrow stuff that we think should be celebrated. Interestingly enough, though, the most controversial, for all of the stuff that I've done on like rape film and really kind of violent exploitation film, without doubt the most controversial film that I've worked on that had the most heated noise on social media was for Kino Lorber, and it's actually one of the commentaries that I'm probably the most proud of, and it was with Josh Nelson, which was Cool as Ice for Kino Lorber. People lost their minds. Like, people were really angry, really, really angry and really offended. It was fascinating. There was one guy on Twitter was like, there's no, like, he listed Josh and I by names. He's like, these are just made up names. There's no way that these people really exist. I'm like, hey, come on. And that was really fascinating to me, because I think, I had this idea of like lowbrow, highbrow being a kind of related to budgets, like, big budget, kind of impressive highbrow movies, and lower budget, infernal rapist type
Right.
stuff. But then you get something like Cool as Ice in the middle, and the response to that. And funnily enough, I think that was probably one of the people that actually did listen to the commentary. We got really positive feedback for that, and that's to this day, that's probably one of the commentaries that I'm the proudest of in a way,
Wow.
which I think surprises people. But why shouldn't Cool as Ice have considered attention? It's a really interesting film. It speaks to a moment of time in a way that I think not a lot of other films from that era do. I think it's a fascinating movie.
That is hilarious. I'd love to hear what anybody has to be offended by that. I mean, you bring up a good point with being proud of some of these releases, and as somebody that's getting into doing visual essays and commentaries myself, what are you most proud of? What are the ones that you feel like should have the biggest impact on what you've done so far?
That's a really good question. I'm only going from memory here.
Of course.
So this isn't like me having gone through a list of everything that I've done.
Well, when you've done so many, this has got to be hard.
Right. The video essay that I think I'm the proudest of, and a lot of, I have to say here, I don't do visual editing. So there's wonderful people like Jonathan Zar, and so many people that do the kind of nuts and bolts. They get the visuals together. Yep. Phil Escott at Second Sight, really, they are kind of co-authors in these video essays. I record the audio, I write the script, and I do all the research, and I record the audio, and then I give them to a genius who pulls together the visual. So that needs to be acknowledged, I think, that it's a collaborative thing. But the one that I think I'm the most proud of was with Second Sight, for a film called Swallow, which is just Carlo Mirabella Davies, I think. The director's name is. My apologies if I've gotten that wrong. It's a recent film, 2019, I think.
It's a great movie.
It's an incredible movie, right? And I love that movie so much. And Carlo is an extraordinarily thoughtful and generous and kind filmmaker. I think there's an enormous compassion and intelligence to his work that you don't normally see that kind of combination of. But I believe, I'm going from memory here, but I think the audio that I submitted for that video essay was about an hour and a half. I think it was about the runtime of the actual film. And I think it was, I believe, I could be mistaken, and my apologies if I've got the name wrong. I believe it was Phil Escott who edited that together and actually made it kind of coherent. Yeah, like I that's a film that I just can't speak more highly of. And to be, I mean, so many of these films, with commentaries, very close together, I was able to do Ida Lupino's Outrage for Imprint, the wonderful people at Imprint here in Melbourne. Hi, Josh. And very close to that, I was able to do with Josh Nelson, Morven Colour by Lynn Ramsey for Fun City Editions. And they are two films that I never thought would get out on Blu-ray. They came very, very close together, and they just sort of arrived in my inbox, these invitations to do commentaries for those films. And it was really exciting. It was such an exciting thing. It's like, these are films that I never thought would ever get released, let alone have these kind of considered, really thoughtfully put together packages. Trouble Every Day is another one, which recently came out, the Claire Denis film Trouble Every Day. Like, I never thought that I would see that, on a really solid home entertainment release that we have now. So they're the ones that leap to mind, but I'm forgetting so many things. Session 9 is another one for Second Sight. Like, that was just a delight to work on. But Arrow. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'm always baffled at what Second Sight is able to get for some of these releases. And
absolutely.
Even Swallow is a great example, because There's something about that film. It was released at the perfect time because I think 2019 is right, like you said, because I had I had a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old at that time, and we had
Wow.
just sort of recovered from my youngest. We thought that he might have pica, like the individual in Swallow has, and he for 13 months straight he was spitting up constantly. We couldn't get actual food in him, but everything that wasn't food he'd put in his mouth immediately. And it was a rough time. And then watching that movie was just, God, this is beautiful, but this is also terrifying.
I saw that at Fantastic Fest. I think it might have been the North American, no, the US premiere. I'm not sure. My apologies if I've got that wrong. And the kind of synopsis, the blurb of the film is there's basically like a pretty little young blonde thing, and she eats funny things. She swallows thumbtacks and batteries and poops them out. That sort of So there was a lot of there's a lot of kind of, you could see that there were guys in there who was like, oh, let's watch this chick eat weird shit.
Yep.
And the way that the place that film goes, and I remembered quite early on in the film thinking, if this was a good, like, where this should go is so cutting edge and so brave, and there's no way it's going to do it, and it's exactly where it went. And I was just so excited by this film because I just didn't think it would have the guts to do what it did.
Right.
And it does, and it's such a, I don't want to give it away for people who haven't seen it, but I think on the subject where it goes to, I think it's one of the most powerful and timely films on
Yep.
this particular thing. And these poor guys at Fantastic Fest, they went in their beers like, hey, she's gonna poop out a battery, and it goes somewhere so whoa, and you could just see them like frozen. It's a magic film. It's a really magical film. And look, I mean, Second Sight's a really good example when it comes to acquisitions. I've talked about Brad Henderson,
Yes.
but Chris at Second Sight is such an intuitive person when it comes to acquisitions. Like, he really just gets it. Sometimes I wonder, I mean, I've not talked to him about this, so I don't want to, put words in his mouth, but I do wonder, like, I think it's just instinct. I think sometimes he just is like, you know what, I love this film and I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And it never misses. It never misses. So that kind of intuition, I think, for acquisitions for home media needs a lot more acknowledgement and sort of respect for that alone, because I think it kind of drives the industry, really. The kind of gut feeling that sometimes dominates these acquisitions as much as anything on a spreadsheet. It's exciting.
It is. And the titles that they've gotten, the big thing for Second Sight, it's not a genre. They're all across the board. It's not a well-known film versus a film that's lesser known. It's not highbrow versus lowbrow. They kind of have everything at Second Sight.
It's interesting. I've done quite a few Australian films for Second Sight, which has been fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Umbrella and Imprint do some great work, really, really great work. So I don't want to sort of denigrate what they're doing at all. But I was really surprised to see this sort of wave of Australian films that Second Sight picked up and put such enormous care into. I think the first one that I did for them was Lake Mungo.
Yeah.
And then, Picnic at Hanging Rock and Chopper. Around this same time, I worked on a release of Snowtown. I can't remember who that was for. And for someone else, I did Romper Stomper. These were, I believe, all UK companies.
They were. Snowtown, I believe, was 101 Films, and I think Romper Stomper was 88 Films.
88, yeah. And they were, delights to work on. Really delightful projects to work on. So, yeah, it was really interesting coming to those as an Australian critic for a kind of international audience or for a UK audience. Because you kind of need to reframe a lot of the stuff critically that you would sort of take for granted here in terms of, First Nations history and these sort of more nuanced local kind of things, especially for, something like Chopper or Picnic at Hanging Rock. Lake Mungo is a really obvious one. Even the title Lake Mungo, the significance of that title for people in the UK might not be as kind of common knowledge as it is here.
Yeah, you're an ambassador of sorts at that point. You're delivering
it feels a little bit like that. Yeah, like almost like a little bit of a kind of summarized history lesson. Yeah,
Well, and look at what they did for The Nightingale. I mean, everything on that release is that movie itself was one that delivered that culture. It was like an ambassador for people to
absolutely.
understand what happened.
Yep. Second Sight did both the Babadook and Nightingale, I think, and I
Yep.
believe that Josh and my commentary for Babadook got it's actually the Australian 4K release, UHD release, sorry, of Babadook. I believe has our commentary from the UK, which is really
Nice.
amazing.
Made its way back to the homeland.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we talked about some of the ones that you're more proud of.
Mhm.
What do you think are some ones that are overlooked? Some that people should seek out that maybe you don't ever hear any feedback on that you'd love people to check out?
It's a really good question. Probably the stuff that I do video essays for.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, for commentaries, I would say, like, I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago, again with Josh Nelson, we did a couple of Mae West commentaries for Kino Lorber, which was there was like a Mae West box set,
Yeah.
and they were great. They were really fun to do. Um, but yeah, video. I really I love doing video essays because I think I'm a very visual person, and I really like with a video essay in that you're not sort of restricted in the same way that you are with a commentary to sort of um, focus on particular moments or kind of general themes. Where a video essay, you have a lot more elasticity with time. You can sort of
Yep.
take one shot or one scene and really stretch it out and really play with it. And for me, just my critical style, I think that's what I really like doing, is like really getting deep into the guts of like a camera composition or the particular framing or the mise en scène or some aspect like that. And video essays give me a lot of space to do that, that I feel is the most freeing. So yeah, that I guess the video. So rather than a particular release, I would say that's the form that I feel that I kind of thrive in the most.
Yeah.
If that makes
I would
sense.
agree. There's quite a few that you've done that I feel like nobody talks about. And
Mhm.
I know last year when I did the Shelf Shock Rewind Awards, I filled out my initial thing that I was looking at for visual essays, and I think I had a list of like 12, and I think you were 6 of them. So,
Wow. Which can you remember? I'm curious which
oh
ones.
gosh, I probably
Um,
have the notes somewhere on the computer still. I can
you know,
find them eventually.
one that I really love doing. That because I think I also had a written release on. I've already mentioned the second site release of Session 9.
Yes.
That was a video essay I love doing because it was all about collage in that film. It's a film about collage and the way that collage works in that film. And that's the kind of thing you couldn't do that in any other way. You couldn't do that. You couldn't
Right.
present that argument in any other format. It has to be visual. It wouldn't work on a commentary because you're speaking about very specific shots at very specific
Yep.
moments that kind of tie in back to each other. It's this sort of patchwork. Um, so that in a way, that's the one that I think that really kind of culminates all of the things that I find the most rewarding in doing a video essay.
Yeah.
And again, so much of that depends on the editor, the visual editor.
That's
So
true.
I again really want to amplify that I don't do the magic. I just give them the words, and these genius, people like Phil and Jonathan come in and weave their magic.
As someone who's been editing a lot over the last couple weeks, I appreciate that. um,
Jarrett Gahan is another one. Jarrett Gahan needs a shout out as well. He does some um, amazing video essay editing on things that
I,
I've worked on. There
I
are
will
people that I'm not forgetting to mention, but I really want to put those names out there.
I will use the moment to highlight visual essays. I feel like as a whole are being overlooked a lot. I feel like a lot of people are looking at audio commentaries, and that is like the gold standard of bonus feature. If this disc doesn't have an audio commentary, what's the point? But in all reality, there is so many of these releases that you can put something in a visual essay that makes zero sense in an audio commentary.
I
You're
agree.
not going to do an audio commentary on the director's filmography, for example. Why would you watch a movie with that playing in the background? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So yeah, those visual essays that you can do documentaries, you can highlight certain things in a scene, certain actors, and you've done a great job with many of those. So yeah, people need to check those out.
It's interesting to look at something like the Arrow player. I did a video essay for The Stylist for Arrow for their physical release of The Stylist, which is an amazing film. But Arrow actually put the video essay or the
Yep.
visual essay on to their streaming service as well as a kind of package with the film. And I got a lot of feedback about that. And I thought that was really interesting
Wow.
that the visual essay kind of got a second life outside of the actual physical release.
Interesting.
And I know that Umbrella in Australia have just launched a streaming service called
Oh,
Broly.
wow.
And I think that they're interested in doing a similar kind of thing of having these kind of supplementary materials available on the streaming service. And I think
Yeah.
that's really exciting. I think that's a really interesting way to kind of revive some of these extras that might have got lost the first time around. And I'd love
Yeah.
to see more of that.
I feel like in the States, at least, there's a handful. Like, I think it's the Glass Onion, the Knives Out sequel got a commentary because Ryan Johnson, the director, is Ryan Johnson. He's huge, he's powerful, whatever. So it's the only reason it got a commentary. But imagine how much more people could appreciate these things if you could go on Netflix and surf the features with these, and
Right.
not only increase the value of what people are feeling, gouged by nowadays because prices have doubled and tripled.
Mm-hmm.
That would be
Absolutely.
so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like it. I think that's a nice sort of avenue that some of this material is taking. It's almost sort of reversed the idea of physical media being,
Yeah.
the archive. It's like actually you can put that back on streaming and kind of revive, breathe life into,
Right.
especially with the kind of things that we're interested in. It's mostly rep cinema. So mostly you're dealing with films that people, it's not all rep, but mostly you're dealing with films that people have already seen and they already have a relationship to. So you're
That's
sort
true.
of breathing life back into that, and it's lovely.
Well, and the big thing with rep cinema that a lot of us, not only are people associated with it, they have their own memories of it, but one of the things that I really want to remind people of is those films have a reputation. So when something plays, people are going in there with some sort of bias already. They have something, especially if they've never seen it before. If they're going to a Rocky Horror Picture Show screening, they've heard about this for decades, and now they're finally going to see it, and it's going to be really hard to live up to that moment. So, changes the way you view that film.
It does, and it's one of the on a really kind of base level, I think it's one of the great luxuries of doing film criticism work with physical media and with home entertainment, is that you have the gift, like unlike really certainly the kind of as the meat grinder of new releases, or for me personally with online writing in general, you have the gift with this stuff in that you're dealing with an audience that already is engaged.
Yep.
You don't need to sell them on the film. They're for somebody to cough up £30 or £40 for a Blu-ray,
Yeah.
they've already got a connection to that. And it might be that it's a new film that they've heard things about. But when you make that kind of like literal investment,
Yeah.
into buying a disc and bringing it home with you, you're paying attention in a way that's very, very different to the way that people engage with online criticism. For me, anyway. Like that might not be the case for other people, and maybe that changes if you're writing for like the New Yorker. But I find that you're really dealing with a committed audience, and that's a gift.
Yeah, that buy-in, like a phrase you had used earlier, you can't really buy that sort of buy-in. If people are already there, they're invested and they're on your side already.
Exactly.
This is probably a pretty obvious question, but really would love to dive into, you have this diverse range of writing and titles that you've contributed to. What are some dream titles that would surprise us? Because obviously, I never expected Kindergarten Cop to get not only 2 new commentaries, but have you be one of them that's going to draw me in. So what are some that might just blow some people away that you'd be like, if this is offered to me, this is a dream title of mine?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Probably a lot of older stuff. I think sort of older, like black and white stuff. So, Harvey off the top of my head, the James Stewart film, like that would be like, I didn't even know if that's been released. Modern Girls, this amazing 80s film that I'm obsessed with, which I believe has had a Blu-ray release, I think from Kino Lorber. That being said, I have to say I'm not particularly territorial. and this is quite controversial because I think different contributors have different relationships to this.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's like films that I love that I actually don't want to be on. Like I'd much rather, a really good example of this is Kat Ellinger did an incredible commentary for Base Moi. And the famous French, it's called a rape revenge film, but it's kind of not. But
Right.
I was so thrilled that Kat got that. Like, I'd much, because I want to hear what she's doing. I want to hear her thoughts on it.
Yep.
So I don't feel particularly territorial. I don't think I've ever had a release come out where I've been like, oh, I should have been on that. Because even if it's stuff that I have particular expertise in, it's not, I'd rather hear somebody else. If it's a good critic, I'd rather, I mean, who doesn't want to hear Kat Ellinger talk about anything?
Right.
Because she's amazing, right? So yeah, I'm pretty kind of open-minded with that stuff, I have to say. Like I don't, I mean, one of my books is on masks in horror, and I don't think I've ever done a commentary on a film that has sort of heavily featured masks. But I'm not, and I think that's, that's obviously something that I could speak to very easily because, how many horror films have masks in them?
Right.
But that being said, like I don't feel particularly territorial or that's my terrain. And certainly that's not the case with rape revenge or with found footage horror or with masks. Like I don't feel that kind of possessiveness. I feel a little bit more, maybe when I was younger I might have, but I feel a little bit more relaxed.
Well, and it
now.
would
Like
get dreadfully
I'd rather hear other
boring
people.
too.
Right. I'll kind of hear what other people are bringing to the table, and especially if I've written a book about something, like the book is kind of like I kind of work my way through the material. Like I kind of resolve my relationship to that particular subject. So it's not like I'm kind of itching to kind of be heard on a particular topic. Like I feel like, there's enough from me out there in the ether on rape revenge films. And it's not saying that I don't want to do more rape revenge films. One of the I did Thriller, A Cruel Picture for Vinegar Syndrome, which was an amazing experience. So I love doing commentaries on these things that I've written about. I love it.
Right.
Witches, like I haven't, the witch book isn't out yet, but I don't think I've done much on witches yet. So I would love to, it's always really lovely to revisit these things, found footage horror especially, which I'm obsessed with. But at the same time, I'm always very excited to hear what other people, as long as it's, somebody that like Kat Ellinger, like somebody who I want to hear.
Right.
I don't want to be bitchy, but if it's somebody that I'm not so into, maybe I won't be rushing to listen to it, but I still don't feel that, it's my terrain,
Well, that's the next question. Who's on that list? I'm just kidding.
Alphabetical. Starting with A.
Pull it out. I've had it ready. I've been waiting for somebody to ask. Alexandra, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for spending the time today.
My pleasure. It's been a delight.
I would love to have you back someday. And if you ever get a chance, I would love to. First off, I need to buy that book the moment it comes out. I can't wait to read that.
Hopefully next year. As I said, my publisher have been very patient, so I we'll see. Hopefully 2024.
It's good to hear. All right, I will link everything for Alexandra below, and if you have any questions, she's fairly approachable. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching The Disconnected. On the way out, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, that you've liked the video, and that you've copied the link to be able to share with someone else that may appreciate this.